She looked at me with that knowing smile, the kind that makes your heart stumble, and whispered, "You're too young, but that's exactly why I can't look away." I hadn't planned on staying long that evening. It was just supposed to be a quick stop by Daniel's place to help him finish a project and maybe grab a late snack. But the summer air was thick with that honeyed, lazy kind of warmth that makes you linger without meaning to. The screen door creaked as I stepped inside, and almost instantly I caught a faint aroma of jasmine mixed with something older, the faint musk of old books and polished wood. It felt like a house that had lived many lives. Daniel called from upstairs, telling me he'd be a few minutes, and that's when I heard her voice, low, smooth, almost amused, drifting from the kitchen. "Help yourself to some water," she said. "You look like you've been walking through a sauna out there." I turned, and there she was, his mother. I'd seen her in passing before, always in a rush, always put together in a way that felt effortless. But that night, something was different. She wore a soft beige cardigan over a pale linen top, her hair pulled loosely into a knot that let a few strands fall around her cheekbones. She looked at me with eyes that didn't quite match her easy smile, they were sharper, curious, assessing. "Thanks," I said, reaching for the glass she was already holding out. Our fingers brushed as I took it, just the lightest touch, cool glass between us, but the contact lingered longer in my mind than it should have. "You're one of Daniel's friends, right?" she asked, leaning a hip against the counter. "Yeah. We've been working on a few things for class." She tilted her head, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "Class? You seem a bit too young to be interested in good wine or conversation, then." The remark should have rolled off easily, just a playful jab. But the way she said it, the way her eyes held mine a beat longer than casual, it didn't feel dismissive. It felt like an opening, a tiny thread pulled loose between us. I sipped the water, hoping it would cool the sudden warmth in my face. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just starting to catch up. Her eyebrow arched slightly at that. "Is that so?" For a moment, the kitchen felt quieter, like the hum of the refrigerator had taken a step back to listen in. There was no rush in her movements, no urgency in her tone, just a calm, steady presence that somehow made me more aware of my own nervous hands resting against the counter. Daniel came downstairs then, breaking whatever strange, charged stillness had settled between us. She stepped away, brushing past me as she set the empty glass near the sink. Her sleeve brushed my arm, a whisper of fabric against skin, and she gave me one last half-smile before turning her attention to her son. I followed Daniel out to the porch, but my mind stayed behind, replaying that smirk, amused, maybe even a little dangerous, and the strange, quiet gravity in her eyes. The next time I found myself at Daniel's house, it wasn't planned either. We had a group project due, and he'd asked me to swing by earlier than usual so we could get a head start. I knocked, expecting him to answer, but the door eased open with a soft creak and a rush of afternoon air that smelled faintly of citrus polish and something baking. She was there, alone in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pinned back with a simple clip. The late afternoon light cut across the room in golden stripes, catching the faint dust motes that danced in the warm air. "Oh, you're early," she said, glancing over her shoulder with a small, knowing smile. "Daniel's running an errand. Shouldn't be long." I nodded, trying to look unfazed, but the way her presence filled the room was disarming in a way I couldn't explain. She turned back to the counter, arranging something in a ceramic bowl, and I found myself standing a little too still, just watching the rhythm of her movements. "Want some tea?" she asked. "Or coffee? You look like you've been running around all day." "Tea's fine," I said. She set the kettle on, then leaned her hip against the counter again, her posture unhurried, almost deliberately casual. "So, what do you study? Besides whatever it is you and Daniel keep disappearing to work on." "Mostly literature," I said. "Some history. A bit of film." Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smirk this time, more like something thoughtful. "Literature. So you read more than most people your age?" I felt a small laugh slip out. Is that your way of saying I'm too young to appreciate half of what you like? She raised an eyebrow, amused. Not too young, maybe. Just, newer to the world. It's a good thing, you know. Makes you see things with clear eyes. The kettle began to hum, and she moved past me to reach for a tin on the high shelf. I stepped aside quickly, but not quite far enough. Her sleeve brushed my arm as she reached up, and for a fleeting moment, I caught the scent of her, a soft trace of sandalwood and something faintly floral. It was over in an instant, just an ordinary movement in an ordinary kitchen, but it left something lingering in the air, something that made the small space feel warmer than it had moments before. She set the tea in front of me with a quiet clink. Here. Might help you slow down a little. We talked about nothing urgent after that, books she'd read, places she traveled when she was younger. But it was the way she listened, the pauses between her sentences, the way her eyes occasionally lingered when I spoke, that left me more unsettled than the words themselves. By the time Daniel came back, arms full of folders, the tea had gone lukewarm. I followed him upstairs, pretending to focus on the project, but in the back of my mind, the faint trace of sandalwood still lingered, and so did the feeling that this house, and the woman moving quietly within it, had begun to hold something more than just passing moments. That it was one of those evenings when rain blurred the world into a softer version of itself. The windows fogged faintly, the street outside glistening under amber lamps, and the whole house seemed to shrink with the weather. Daniel had stepped out to pick up some food, leaving me alone in the living room with her. She was sitting by the window, a mug of tea cradled in both hands, the steam rising in slow, ghostly curls. A soft playlist hummed in the background, something mellow, a touch of jazz threaded with rain. I hovered by the doorway for a moment, unsure if I was intruding. You don't have to stand there, she said without looking up. Sit. It's warmer by the radiator. I crossed the room, feeling oddly conscious of the sound my shoes made on the wooden floor, and sat on the edge of the couch. She glanced at me then, that same assessing look, but softer this time, quieter, as if the rain had dulled the edges of her usual composure. Do you like nights like this? She asked. I nodded. They make everything feel closer, I guess. Like the world stops rushing for a bit. Her smile tilted faintly at the corner. That's a rare thing to notice at your age. The remark wasn't teasing this time, it carried a kind of wistfulness. She sipped her tea and set the mug down, her fingers tracing the rim absently. You know, she said, people think age makes you immune to loneliness. It doesn't. If anything, it just makes you better at hiding it. Something about the way she said it, not dramatic, just honest, caught me off guard. I found myself wanting to say something that mattered, something that didn't sound rehearsed. I think everyone hides it, I said quietly. Some of us just haven't learned how to do it gracefully yet. For a moment, her eyes met mine across the room. They weren't challenging now, just open, the kind of look that made the space between us feel less like a gap and more like an unspoken question. The front door rattled faintly as the wind pressed against it. She rose, stepping toward the porch, muttering something about checking the latch. When she came back in, her hair was damp from the misty rain outside, strands clinging to her temple. I stood, almost without thinking, and reached for the towel draped over the arm of the couch. Here, I said, holding it out. Her fingers brushed mine as she took it, light but deliberate. Thank you, she murmured, her voice lower now, almost lost beneath the rain. It was such a small thing, the warmth of the towel, the soft dampness of her skin beneath it, but it stayed with me, more than the conversation, more than the rain. By the time Daniel returned, arms full of takeout, the moment had folded itself neatly away, as though it had never existed. But I knew it had. I felt it still, in the lingering warmth of the towel that had passed from my hands to hers. The house had settled into that late-night stillness where every sound felt amplified, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustle of leaves outside, even the distant ticking of the wall clock. Daniel had dozed off on the couch, laptop still open on his chest, the glow from the television washing his features pale. She and I were in the living room, voices lowered almost automatically, as if even the air had to be handled gently. A single lamp in the corner threw a warm amber glow across the room, making her hair shimmer in places where the light touched it. "Looks like your partner in crime is out," she said with a quiet chuckle, glancing toward her son. "Yeah," I whispered, "he's going to wake up with a stiff neck after that." She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms loosely, and for a moment we just listened to the house. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving a damp coolness that clung to the window panes. There was something about the quiet that made every word feel deliberate. "You've been helping him a lot lately," she said after a pause. "Not many people stick around just to help." I shrugged lightly. "It's not a big deal. He's a good friend." Her gaze lingered, thoughtful, steady. "Good friends are rare at your age. Most people are too busy rushing somewhere else." I laughed softly, rubbing the back of my neck. "Maybe I just like slowing down here. Feels different." She tilted her head, a faint smirk tugging at her lips again, the same one from the first evening, but now tempered by something warmer. "Careful," she said lightly, that almost sounded like a compliment. Before I could respond, she leaned forward to pick up a book from the low table between us. As she reached out, her fingers brushed my forearm, a slow, almost absent-minded touch that didn't withdraw immediately. I felt my breath catch, not because it was bold, but because it wasn't. It was the kind of touch that didn't ask permission, didn't pretend to be accidental, but didn't demand a reaction either. Her fingertips pressed lightly through my sleeve, just enough for warmth to seep through. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for a fraction of a second, everything else, the couch, the sleeping friend, the low hum of the TV, seemed to blur. "You really are too young to hide your thoughts," she murmured, a teasing whisper, but her voice held no cruelty, just a quiet, knowing amusement. I wanted to say something, a joke, a deflection, but nothing came. My mouth felt dry. She let her hand fall away, slow and unhurried, leaving behind a trace of heat where it had rested. "Go on," she said, settling back with the book, her smirk softening into something closer to a smile. "You'll miss the last train if you stay too long." And just like that, the spell broke, or at least, it pretended to. I gathered my things, nodded toward her, and slipped out into the cool night air, but the imprint of her touch stayed, a quiet echo against my skin all the way home. It was a warm Saturday evening, the kind that carried the smell of cut grass and grilled food through the air. Daniel had gone away for the weekend, a last-minute camping trip with his cousins, and she had called me that afternoon, her voice casual yet laced with a hesitation I couldn't quite place. "If you're not busy," she said, "you could stop by. I could use a hand setting up the patio lights. It gets lonely out here when it's too quiet." I told myself it was just that, helping out. But by the time dusk fell and the lanterns began to flicker against the fading blue sky, I knew it was more than that. She stepped out carrying a tray, the soft clink of cutlery and a faint trail of rosemary and lemon from the food. The patio light strung above us swayed in the breeze, throwing a gentle, golden light over her shoulders. "You didn't have to make all this," I said as she set the tray down. She smiled, not the teasing kind this time, but something warmer, more grounded. "I like cooking for someone. It reminds me that life can still be shared, you know." We ate slowly, conversation meandering from harmless topics, films, books, to heavier ones that hung in the air a little longer. She told me about the things she wished she'd done differently, the places she didn't go, the chances she let pass by because they felt too risky, too impractical. Her voice stayed steady, but every now and then her fingers tightened around her wine glass, like she was holding back the weight of what those choices had cost her. "I always thought by this age I'd feel settled," she admitted, her eyes reflecting the light above. "Turns out, you can have everything in order and still feel like something's missing." I hesitated, then said quietly, "I think everyone feels that. We just pretend we don't." She looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment, the years between us felt like a shadow that neither of us moved to step out of. The wind picked up, tugging a strand of her hair loose from its clip. It brushed against her cheek, and without thinking, I reached out, fingers brushing it gently back behind her ear. She didn't flinch. Didn't pull away. Her breath caught just enough for me to hear it, then she exhaled slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. "Careful," she murmured, her voice low, "you keep doing things like that, and people might start to talk." But there was no bite in her words, only the faintest smile, one that lingered long after I lowered my hand. The night stretched on softly after that. We talked less, listened more, to the crickets, to the faint rustle of the trees, to the space between sentences that said far more than words could. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. Her hand rested lightly on my shoulder, just for a moment, a touch that felt like both a warning and a promise that it was past midnight when I came by that night. Daniel had texted me earlier about picking up some files he'd left behind, and I figured I'd be in and out in minutes. The house was dark except for a thin stripe of light spilling from the kitchen door, warm against the cool stillness of the hallway. I stepped inside quietly, and there she was, barefoot on the tiled floor, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. The fridge door was open, casting a soft white glow over her face as she reached for a bottle of water. "You're up late," she said, glancing over her shoulder, her voice somewhere between surprise and something else I couldn't name. "Yeah," I murmured. "Just came to grab a few things for Daniel. Didn't mean to wake anyone." She closed the fridge, the light vanishing into the dark like a curtain falling, leaving only the soft glow of the stove lamp. "You didn't," she said. "I couldn't sleep anyway." There was no rush to the moment. No noise, no background chatter, just the sound of the house breathing around us. I moved to the counter where the files were stacked, but somehow we both ended up reaching for the same glass at the same time. Our fingers touched, a brief, trembling brush, and neither of us moved away. Her hand lingered a fraction longer than it needed to, her thumb catching against my knuckle before she let go. She exhaled, a sound so faint it almost wasn't there. "You don't make this easy, you know that." I swallowed, unsure whether to laugh or apologize. "Make what easy?" Her eyes flicked up to mine, not sharp this time, not teasing, but searching. "Pretending," she said softly. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, the walls pulling in just a little. I could feel the cool air from the window, the faint smell of mint from the tea bag she'd set aside earlier. I took half a step closer, not enough to cross a line, just enough to make the space between us feel deliberate. She didn't move back. "I'm not trying to make anything hard," I said finally. She gave a quiet, almost rueful laugh, the kind that comes from someone who knows what they should do but hasn't quite convinced themselves to do it. "No," she whispered, "but you are making it real." The silence stretched. Her hand was still on the counter, inches from mine. My heart was beating too loudly in my chest, the sound of it thudding in my ears like a drum. For a moment, one long, suspended moment, it felt like the night tilted forward, daring one of us to close that inch of space. Then she stepped back. Just a fraction, just enough to let the cool air slide between us again. "It's late," she said gently. "You should get going before it gets complicated." I nodded, though my feet stayed rooted for a beat longer than they should have. As I left, the sound of the fridge motor humming back to life was the only thing that reminded me I was still standing in a kitchen, not somewhere in between a decision and a dream. The house felt different in the morning, fuller, louder. Daniel was back, clattering through the kitchen, already complaining about how the trip left him more tired than rested. The windows were thrown open to let the late summer air roll through, and the garden outside was waking in a wash of gold. I'd come by to return a few things I'd borrowed over the week, but mostly I think I came because I couldn't leave things as they were, hanging in that midnight kitchen, unspoken and unfinished. She was out in the garden, crouched beside a row of lavender, fingers dusted with soil. The sun caught on her hair, turning it almost copper at the edges. When she noticed me standing at the gate, her lips curved in that familiar half-smile, not the teasing one, not the wary one, but something gentler, like a door opened without a sound. "You're early," she said, brushing her hands on her jeans as she stood. Wanted to drop these off, I said, lifting the stack of folders. And, see how you've been. Daniel's voice called from inside, asking about coffee, and she waved him off without looking away from me. Busy, as you can see, she murmured, a faint hint of amusement in her tone. For a moment we just stood there, the garden humming around us, bees dipping into blooms, the faint rustle of the wind stirring the herbs. The awkwardness I had expected wasn't there. Instead, there was a kind of calm, like the storm had already passed and left something clearer behind. About the other night, I started, unsure how to thread the words. She shook her head lightly, not in dismissal, but as though to stop the words from tangling before they began. You don't have to explain, she said softly. Sometimes, things don't need names to be real. Her eyes held mine, steady and warm. Maybe young isn't so bad, she added after a pause. Sometimes it just means you notice things the rest of us stopped looking for. There was no smirk this time, no barrier of teasing between us. Just a quiet acceptance, of the closeness that had formed, of the care that neither of us could quite deny. As she moved past me toward the house, her hand rose almost absent-mindedly and rested against my chest, a brief, grounding touch, her fingers pressing lightly over my shirt. It lasted a second, maybe two, but in it was everything unspoken, patience, acknowledgement, and a strange kind of promise that didn't need to rush. I felt the warmth of her palm even after she had gone inside, leaving the door ajar, sunlight spilling across the floor. Daniel appeared a moment later, mug in hand, asking if I was staying for breakfast. I said maybe, but the truth was, I already felt full, the kind of full that comes from finally breathing out what you've been holding in for weeks. As I walked toward the porch, the garden behind me still carrying the scent of lavender and morning dew, I realized that what had started as a teasing smirk had become something quieter, steadier, not a secret to chase, but a connection to carry.